Don't forget who you are. Don't forget who you are. Our story in 2 Samuel today, the story of David, one of the greatest stories in history, by the way, and one of the few stories in the Bible that's just simply a ripping good time to read, comes in the early days of David's rule. A time when he conquers the city of Jerusalem and unites the people of Israel under him. And as part of this, David, who rose from being a shepherd to a military leader for Saul to being a king, is sent a gift, a peace offering, no doubt, from the king of Tyre. Cedar trees and carpenters to build David a spectacular house. And David, setting up shop, realizing that the time has come to bask in the good things after his time of fighting wilderness battle after wilderness battle, calls Nathan, his friend, the prophet. And he says, look at this. I'm living in this house of cedar, but the Lord our God lives in a tent. Now, remember your Raiders of the Lost Ark movie memories a bit. The Ark was not God. It had two purposes. One, it held the first, or rather the second edition of the Ten Commandments. Remember, Moses kind of smashed up the first. And second, it was the throne of God. It was believed that God physically sat upon it. So you can understand why David, whom God has been very good to, would suddenly be worried about living in luxury compared to God, especially since God brought him here. And you can understand why David wants God out of that tent and wants to build him a house. So that is why he calls Nathan, and Nathan says, hey, go for it. And remember at this time, God and David practically had the same thoughts. God was always with David. So why not, right? Go ahead. Build God a house. I'm sure that's what God wants. Except when Nathan falls asleep that night, God speaks. David will not build a house for me. I will build a house for David. Remember who you are. God reminds David of who he is and of who God is. And God promises to establish the rule of David's house in a very permanent way. The wild and often tragic story of David had another time when he had to remember who he was. David had many sons, but one of the oldest was Absalom. Now, Absalom was kind of a teen idol. I think he got Dad's good looks. The girls loved his long, luxurious hair. But Absalom wanted to be king. And having a dad like David, who lived a really, really long time, not to mention all those other brothers around who also were hungry for the throne, well, all that could be kind of frustrating. And after some rather masterful maneuvers, Absalom gathers a force great enough to force David and his followers out of Jerusalem. A great enough force to get David to run. Or was he really running? By this point, David was older, kind of like me. He had this almost Robin Hood-like band of merry men. Guys who had fought and froze and gone hungry with him in countless battles, in their youth and into middle age. Older now, kind of like me. But here's the thing. What they did, what they were good at, it was fighting in the forests, fields, in valleys, and across the hills. We might call it guerrilla warfare today. And David, he was a genius commander once you got him outside the city walls. He knew how to use the land. He knew it like the back of his hand, and he knew how to make you make mistakes and make you pay. And those gnarly, overweight guys with him, now ticked off, missing their soft beds, their good meals, their reward for years and years of risking their lives in David's service? Genius fighters outside the city walls. David remembered who he was. And Absalom and his boys, all hyped up on their speed and superior strength and testosterone. There's a saying from David Mamet: old age and treachery will always beat youth and exuberance. Absalom and his boys went down like cardboard in front of a chainsaw, like the inexperienced, overconfident, pampered nuisances that they were. They lost to the grizzled old guys, and they paid with their lives. Because David remembered who he was. Not a soft, spoiled king born and raised behind the walls of a city. A street rat. A shepherd boy. A kid who had learned to survive. A kid who had learned to depend on God. Remember who you are. Remember who you are. And remember who God is. In our gospel lesson today, we hear Gabriel tell Mary that the throne of David, the house of David, it's going to be born in her, in Jesus. And as fun as it might be to tell the old war stories of Jesus' great, 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 etc. grandfather, the house of David is now going to be built on something different. It's going to be built on the call to be peacemakers, the call to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. The story of David reminds us that the world is not really any less crazy than it used to be, but Jesus brings a different remedy to the craziness than the sword. Jesus brings love. Remember who you are. And for us as Jesus followers, Christ followers, what we are, who we are, what we're called to be, is people who love. And God will be there. In the days ahead, no matter who wins the election, no matter what happens with the economy, no matter where the next storm or fire comes from, no matter what turn this world will take, the call to you and me is going to stay the same. Remember who you are. You are God's and called to love. As David did, as Jesus did, we can just live our lives after that. And we can remember that our Father will one day make it all right.